Hey, good evening to everybody. Glad you joined us today. And we have with us Brad Leeper, who comes to us from Generis down south. And where he's at, it's a little bit warmer than we are here today. And he probably didn't have the rain that we did. But we had the opportunity to be introduced to him several months ago. And just felt like he could help us out in so many ways. He's willingly volunteered to, so we're very thankful for the opportunity that we have. And so as you're coming on, if you have questions tonight during the presentation, you can hit chat and type them. If Brad sees them, he can answer. If he misses them, Bill will pick those up when Brad gets done making the presentation. We're planning tonight, he's going to plan to talk about 30-35 minutes, have questions. We'll see how it all goes. Feel free to ask as many questions as you would like. And the goal tonight, as Brad and I have talked, is we want to help you with your stewardship issues, helping you raise tithe funds for your own church, your own operations. And then for those of you who are looking at building, or if you already have debt and you need help with that, Brad's company, Generis, does that very thing. So he comes to us from a Wesleyan perspective, and so he's not far away from us theologically, and his heart is the Lord's. So we're grateful tonight that you have joined us. Others will be coming in on us, and we understand that. Those of you who will be picking us up in a recording, we say to you, welcome to all that we've just said. So let's begin with a quick word of prayer, and we'll jump right into it with Brad. Father, we thank you tonight for what the potential that lies in the conversation tonight. We believe that there are all kinds of opportunities for people to raise funds and to do ministry. And we really want to do more for you and more for the kingdom. So we be with Brad as he shares with us. We thank you for his time. Bless him and his company tonight, and bless all those who will hear. In Christ's powerful name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks,
all right,
Phil.
Brad, all yours.
Great. I am technically not down south. I'm in Chicago today, and it is cold.
Oh, okay.
And in West Virginia is home for me. I live in Georgia because of a woman fell in love with Lisa, native to Georgia, and there we are. God's will for me apparently to live in Georgia for several years. That is where I am. If I'll give you a little bit of background before we start. If each of you, from Chris and Dave and Joseph and Keith, others, Mark, Matthew, Patrick, seeing on the list here, if you would, in the chat feature, type in the one question that you feel like you want answered tonight. If you'd be so kind to do that, I'll make sure I get that question answered before we wrap up at the top of the hour or sooner. So feel free, type away there as your heart's desire. First, to each of you as serving in ministry, a heartfelt, hearty, robust thank you for what you do. Unless you've ever been in ministry, unless you've ever shepherded people in a church situation, whether just starting or a smaller church or a big church, it doesn't matter. It is holy, righteous, godly work. It's hard, it's fun, it's meaningful, it has eternal perspective. Did I mention it's hard and sometimes very taxing and irritating? I was dealing with a couple churches today where it was a head scratcher. You just wanted to say, what were the lay people, the lay leaders thinking when they made that decision? And what, just the trauma and the drama that appeared in the pastor's universe there. But it's all part of the fine and holy work that we do. So thank you very, very much for what you do. Also, this is designed to serve you in your particular questions. We at Generis work with churches all across the country, hundreds every year. Their team, I think, as of today, 45 of us. They coach churches, seminaries, colleges around all things generosity. But we exist to serve you and to make you as successful as possibly you can be in the generosity development of your church. My email is brad@generis.com, GENERIS.com, brad@generis.com. Absolutely feel free to email me with any particular question that you would have. Either I will answer that or one of my colleagues would answer that. Absolutely don't hesitate at all to tap into this. Phil and the leadership there at the district do a fabulous job. He convinced me that he's a unique leader in wanting to serve you, his pastors, in a very unique way. I don't hear that very often from district leaders, area leaders. So if Phil is committed to you as much as he appears to be, I want to be just as committed in any way that I can. Generis is based out of Atlanta, 30 years old as an organization. I'm one of the two principals, privileged to serve in that role, a team of 45 of us, as I mentioned, primarily working with churches across the country, some work in Canada, some work internationally as well. The mission of Generis is to accelerate generosity toward God-inspired vision, and we are pretty passionate about that, whether that be through a capital campaign, whether that be through growing general giving without a capital campaign, or simply to retire debt or to figure out how to maintain giving or grow giving, any number of shapes and sizes that comes into play. And be, again, happy to serve you in your particular situation. As Phil mentioned, I have spent time in the Wesleyan tradition, 12 Stone Church in the Atlanta, had the privilege to serve on the staff team there, and I was with another Wesleyan church today for most of the day. So this has been a good Wesleyan and Wesleyan tradition day on that. All right, let's dive in. The encouragement here is, how do you as a pastor appropriately cultivate and grow generosity in your church? How do you do that while honoring your convictions about how to do that as a pastor? How do you do that in honoring the DNA of the church? How do you do that without feeling like you're doing something inappropriate? Perhaps if you're like me in my ministry training, the number of hours I had in training and education about how to normalize stewardship and generosity in a church, I can count on 0 fingers. 0 amount of time. And how do you do that as a pastor? There's some things that we pick up through tradition, things we pick up through watching others, but generally we are left to our own devices about how to do that. What I'd like to do tonight is to offer you some encouragement and some initial pathways to grow your giving. This will both be primarily applied to how to grow your general giving, but we'll also look at how to do or how to position yourself for a potential campaign in accruing capital dollars to do a project. Let's talk about how to grow generous people. There are 2 reasons that generosity matters in your church. One is on a heart level, and the other is on an organizational level. From a heart level, stewardship and generosity matters because it's a primarily faith cultivator for spiritual formation, for taking steps and growing in our faith. If a person or a couple understands biblical generosity and understands all that is involved in that, and God owns it all, that we return back to the Lord, that we live in light of eternity, that we live counterculturally, particularly with our possessions. If a person embraces that, it is a fabulous catalyst towards spiritual formation. It's how we grow in our faith. If we can master our finances, we can master or we can grow significantly in our spiritual formation. Finances, it's a way we keep score in life. It's a way that we understand, derive meaning, assign value. It represents heart. It represents heart treasure in how we handle faith and finances. So on the first level, why it matters is that normalizing stewardship and generosity in your church will radically grow the spiritual maturity in your people like nothing else. That's part of my own story of moving from what effectively was a greedy person into a life of generosity and progression in all that. The second reason why generosity matters is that you have to fund your mission. Last I checked, it takes financial resources to do what you need to do. The old adage is you're paying to keep the lights on and all those cliches that come along with it. But there's a simple reality that mission does require financial resources. At times, that is the general giving within a church context. At other times, it's a special season where we need to gather dollars for a particular project. And those dollars can be gathered if framed in a way that is informative, inspirational, and equipping the heart of each individual Christ follower. One of my colleagues is leading a funding initiative right now of about $120 million. And all these funding initiatives down to even $100,000 or just starting a church as a church planter and everything in between. Dollars can be raised. You can fund your ministry. How do we know how to navigate that? We'll cover some of those concepts here as we go. Generally, I find in working with pastors across the country and looking at church giving data on a daily basis, I find that many pastors, because they don't really know what to do or are not confident in knowing what to do, they land in what I would call the default church position. And that is running the rhythm of a regular church ministry every Sunday, every weekend. There is an offering, whether that's a basket passed around or a box in the back, or however your church tradition does that in your particular congregation. But if you really run church the way that most would typically run church, you will get some revenue. There will be a handful of people that will faithfully give. Generally, a church mission tends to shrink down to the amount of money that it has. We find that in the default church position, there's the vision of a church. Wow, this is what we think God wants us to do. This is our building. We want to pay some staff. We want to hire some staff. We need to retire debt. Here's the vision. Here's the need. But here's our current financial reality. It's here. It's much easier to shrink the vision and to live in light of that church default position than it is to work diligently to raise the giving levels to match that vision. It's very easy for some of your board members to look at your budget and say, "Hey, we got to peel off some money here. We got to live within our means here." That's very easy to do. It's a little more challenging to raise the income floor to match that mission ceiling. We think that there are some ways that you can raise that to match the mission. You don't have to shrink the vision and the mission to live in that default church position. The pastor is in charge of leading that generosity culture. There's a difference between the fiduciary responsibility that the board may have of are we have checks and balances, are we spending money appropriately, are we living within our budget? That's one role that the board typically has, but generally the board's not going to champion developing the pastoral generosity culture. That lands with you in your pastoral role. Stewardship is not a business office or a treasurer function. It is a pastoral function. The business office or the treasurer undergirds that with appropriate systems and accountability, but the vision casting and the pastoral care is purely a pastoral function. Some pastors get a little freaked out when it comes to the stewardship. Is that appropriate? Is it fair to know what people give? Is that a right thing to do? I would believe that it very much is. People entrust you with the care of their souls. They tell you when they have affairs. You walk with them through illnesses, through issues with family, kids. They're inviting you into the very depths of their lives. And why would we not interact or engage with the heart and finances? Is very much a pastoral function at its core. Therefore, I would argue and advocate that you as pastors, a key part of your pastoral joy and responsibility would be to cultivate and nurture a generous giving environment in your church. We'll get into how to do that as we go deeper into our conversation. Also, from leading a generosity culture, it's more incremental than immediate. If you're doing a lot of small things really well, rather than that, all right, gang, here we are at church today, and I can tell you that we're hurting financially, and if we don't pick it up, we're going to have to cut budget or reduce compensation or whatever it is. Those type of surprise or one and done moments in the life of a church really don't produce much. But doing a lot of things really well over time matters. My daughters are Disney planners at Disney World. They fell in love with Disney as kids, and they've nurtured that into a career. We were at Disney last weekend, courtesy of my daughters, and I was impressed yet again. Whether I wouldn't ever call Disney World politically or spiritually safe or spiritually correct, but they do a lot of things really well. There's not one thing that stands out. They just do a lot of things really well consistently over time. And in the same way, there's some practices and patterns that you as pastors can do that step by step that it crescendos into growing a generosity culture. Same thing if you're preparing for a capital campaign. There are a lot of small things that you can do in the weeks and months leading up to that will probably yield a greater substantial result in your campaign than if you just did more of a traditional, hey, we're starting a capital campaign over the next couple of weeks. We'll show you some building drawings. Let's rally around here and make this happen. Much, much harder to do capital campaigns today in 2019 than it was even 5 years ago and certainly 10 years ago. But here's why you as pastors should be motivated and interested in crafting the giving environment in your church. Number one, it really is a shepherding function. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart is. If we ignore the treasure conversation, we allow the heart to wander into places that would be less spiritually healthy than if we were normalizing the treasure in the faith conversation. Read an article this week that indicated that we as Christians often lose our way and forget. We're forgetful people. If we're not reminded pastorally of stewardship, we will indeed lose our way, and culture will begin to chip away at that, and then we're left in a less than desirable stewardship position. So number one, it is a shepherd function. Number two, it funds ministry. I'd rather have more funds for ministry than less funds for ministry. I've lived in both worlds. It's a lot easier to do ministry when you are abundantly funded. You can do more things, you can compensate people, you can compensate yourself higher. One of the greatest frustrations I have in watching pastors is in their private world, the frustration at home when they're not making enough money. And it creates marriage pressure, it creates kid pressure. It really detracts from ministry. If you're not compensating your church staff or yourself well, it will erode in either way. Either way, it funds ministry in a way that allows you the freedom to achieve what God's called you to do with greater freedom and with greater success. Number three, apart from shepherding function and funding the ministry, we are now at a season where this is a very competitive environment for giving dollars. We have global missions, we have colleges and seminaries, we have friends in ministry that are raising support, we have Young Life, local camps. There are many different places that people can give dollars. A major shift in the church giving environment prior to really the last 10 years and somewhat generationally, giving to the local church was the primary option. Now it is an option. It's not the option, it is one option among many. I was in a conversation 2 weeks ago with a gentleman who was expressing to his pastor and to his board, a couple of board members there. He said, I like to give to the church. It's absolutely fine. But the greater joy in giving goes outside the church. I give only to a certain point of my church, and then my wife and I give way more money away to other places than this church. And it was a very safe place for him to express that. It wasn't inappropriate at all within that setting. But that is very normal, where we find that more and more people are choosing to give to multiple places other than their local church. Some of the cliches have been, or some of the old traditional sayings have been, it's God's offering, God's tithe and our offering. As we look at the church giving data every day, it is highly unlikely that more than 10% of your givers in your churches give from a traditional tithe sense, which would be defined as 10% of gross household income to the local church. If we want to vet that out, We can look at your giving data, no charge to you. We can do some analysis of that, and you can see your own giving data. We'll help you work through what does your giving data tell you. It is a competitive environment. People give money to a lot of places. What we need to do is to articulate an argument why biblical stewardship is paramount to healthy spiritual growth, and then add the argument of, and giving to your church is the priority destination of your giving dollars. We think it should be. Generally, you in pastoral ministry leadership behave that way yourselves. You tend to automatically assume that everybody else thinks that way or should behave that way. It is absolutely not the case 9 times out of 10. Shepherd function, funds ministry, a competitive environment, and people strangely are very grateful when you speak to them about their finances. There's very little said about finances other than from a financial investor or what we read in a paper or what we learned as kids. There's a void out there. So what does God really think about faith and finances? How do I live? How do I prioritize my living? How do I live in light of eternity, but still as a citizen of the earth? How do heaven and earth match there? There's a huge void in people understanding stewardship, faith, and finances. You as pastors get to speak into that void and model and teach about how faith and finances intersect. Therefore, people are very, very grateful when you can coach them up and teach them up and lead them in the right way. Conversely, without you speaking and normalizing that in your church context, there's a vacuum that is created. That vacuum is going to be filled with something. If generally you're silent in your church or don't normalize faith and finances, that vacuum is there and it's going to be filled with something probably that is not as spiritually healthy or as part of the spiritual formation or spiritual development as it could be. And generally, whatever fills that vacuum will lead to a level of dysfunction. They'll outspend, they'll live life of consumers, they'll increase debt, they'll borrow more on their house than they should. You can't give what you don't have. If there's a vacuum that's there and you're not speaking into that and the culture is, then people are going to mishandle their finances, and even if they want to, they're not going to be able to give because they don't have it. And then lastly, why you should craft the giving environment is a biblical mandate to normalize faith and finances. We can look all through Scripture, even from Old Testament law all the way through the New Testament grace and giving, the 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, all these places where it is very normalized biblically to talk to people about faith and finances. Before we can move into a healthy place of pastoral leadership, it's helpful to look at why is it that we ignore action as pastors. Number one, it feels sometimes unspiritual to talk about faith and finances. I want people to embrace Jesus. I don't want people to think about the church as always talking about money, or some level of heightened spirituality of, as a pastor, I don't know anything about giving around here. I want to minister to you in exactly as you are. And these are all fine statements to make, but the pendulum does swing back into that and creates some headwind that tends to crush and discourage a generosity culture. I often hear, I don't want to speak about stewardship that much because I'm afraid of showing favoritism, that I will minister to the rich person inappropriately. We all are aware of the James admonition to that. Conversely, there is 1 Timothy 6 that says, instruct those who are rich in this present world. And it's an interesting list of what you as pastors are to instruct those people around. That's part of your pastoral calling. And you get to do that. It's really cool to speak into faith and finances in a way that helps people. We fear people's pushback. I often find that the loudest people that fuss with us in the church, and maybe your church is different, I don't think so, but people will fuss at you and push back, right? That's just part of the ministry deal. I find that the people who squawk the loudest are the people who often give the least. It's an interesting correlation, not always true, but there are times that we give disproportionate allowance to people who are fussing at us and they're really not giving, I would look at that as you're not really qualified to speak to me at that level if your heart and your treasure are not here at the church at all. It is not uncommon at all for me to come alongside a church. If there are 6 board members, 2 board members are giving very robustly, 2 board members are in the middle of the road, and 2 board members, wow, they're pretty much bringing up the rear of the pack. And that's an issue. I was with a pastor about a month ago. We were looking at giving data, no names at all. And he got mad right there at the table. He got mad because he figured out he was the number 6 giver in the church. We were looking at the amounts of households that gave over the year. He knew what he gave. It was really interesting. You know, the series, the stages of grief, of death. You go through denial and anger and all those things. He went right through all those stages right there until he had to come to reality that he was one of the top givers of the church, and he should not be one of the top givers of the church. Therefore, be aware, know well the condition of your flocks, the proverb says, and knowing, giving, and understanding some of the background of your giving is very, very helpful. Sometimes we ignore action for lack of training. We don't know what to do. We'll be happy to help you understand all that. Sometimes it's not understanding that people live at different emotional levels when it comes to faith and finances. We'll look at that here momentarily. When I was trained in seminary, I was effectively taught if you stand up and preach the word, that it'll all be okay. And while that is generally true, not everybody's at the same place spiritually, maturity, and not everybody in this case is at the same place from a spiritual and stewardship place. A new Christ follower or somebody who's been part of the church 6 months has different questions, different needs, different emotional levels, different life stage levels than somebody who's been at the church 30 years and maybe a board member. Sometimes tradition gets in the way. This is not what we do around here. It's very, very common for tradition to provide a roadblock. There's a difference between conviction and tradition. A lot of the times, the barriers to a stewardship culture or generosity culture are traditions that can easily be honored but overcome or expressed in a different way. If you have a campaign coming, shifting gears, our focus from here on out is going to be more on general giving. Campaigns are in a different context. But if you are looking for a capital campaign, then I would encourage you to email me at brad@generis.com, and I'll walk you through a process of how to prepare the campaign. Phil asked, do you think a pastor should know what everyone gives? Probably a third of the pastors I work with know. Another third kind of know, and the other third would totally believe that they would be a sin if they knew. That's not my call to make, but Phil, I do understand that oftentimes it's a great barometer of where people are spiritually. Understanding where people's giving patterns are is a great place to tell where their heart is. At a minimum, I would encourage pastors to vet key leaders in their giving, board members, sometimes group leaders, certainly staff if you are in a position to be able to hire some staff. If those giving patterns are not in place prior to me being invited into leadership, I would encourage that leadership invitation to be postponed until those giving patterns can be adjusted. It's a great private indicator of what's going on in the private world. I can be very spiritual on the outside, but if you take a look at a person's finances in the private world, it will give you a very, very clarion understanding of where they really are. Bill, does that give you a shot at the answer to that? Yeah. If I had to pick, it's better if you know at least some levels of giving. What I do find if you don't know what those givers are, or what your giving reality is, you have a sense of what that giving reality is, and most oftentimes that's wrong. And when you're leading out of wrong assumptions or a wrong basis, it's faulty leadership. I was with a pastor in Florida 2 years ago now, and he did not know what people gave, and he was adamant. I don't want to know. I just don't want to know. It'll mess me up. I don't trust myself with it. But I really know who the top 5 givers are. Oh, really, said his colleague on staff who knew the giving details because he was in the treasury and the finance side of the church. He said, go ahead, name the 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the pastor had this big smile on his face because he knew he nailed it. No, 1 right. The reality was the other 4 that he named weren't even in the top 50. It was a church of about 1,000 people. He was stunned because he had so in his mind thought he had understood what was going on in his church. He was wrong, and he was leading off of false information. So Phil, you're either going to lead on incorrect information or correct information. A good leader understands the health of the flocks. Knowing some of that giving information is really helpful going forward. All right, a couple key steps in growing the generosity culture. Number 1, this is the easiest, and that is in an offering moment. A church has an amazing home field advantage over every other nonprofit and ministry on the planet, and that is you're in front of your giver base 52 times a year at least, depending upon your group structure or class structure or Sunday night or Wednesday night. You get to talk to your givers 52 times a year. Most often in a church in an offering moment, it's somewhat perfunctory. It's now time if the ushers would come forward for God's tithes and our offering, or as the special music is sung, the offering, the ushers come forward. It's a missed opportunity. We have found that if you would take that 60-second offering moment and work your way through 8 different topics or pillars over time, each of these pillars gets 6 shots a year at a minimum, and it really does change incrementally the giving culture. Here's what those pillars are, and I can send you a resource that lists all these out. But number 1, gratitude. Thank you for your giving. As the team comes forward and as we give today, I want you to know as your pastor, I am utterly grateful for your generosity to this church. Thank you very much. Number 2 is the theological implication. As we give today and as we practice generosity here and around our church, we understand that we're investing in eternity. Jesus gave us a clear understanding that all these things will be added unto you in eternity, and we give, and all that goes ahead of us into eternity. There's a theological gain, there's a theological benefit as we give today. An impact narrative is another one. As you give today, I'd like to tell you the story that last week in our kids ministry, we had 4 kids come to Christ because we ran that program. We were able to run that program because of your generosity. 4 kids are now in the kingdom because of your generosity and as an expression of this church. The others are technical coaching. Here's how you give. Something certainly to normalize in your offering is as the team comes forward or as you use your device and give, if you prefer to use that way through a web page or text to give or whatever way it is. Increasingly, people are not prepared to give in worship, and their financial world is done electronically. We want to normalize how people can give digitally to the church. And it's an interesting thing. It will increase your cash flow if you teach people how to do that. Model how to give. There are other pieces that we would invite you to go through those offering moments, but it's the same 60 seconds. If you deliver a concise, understandable message within that 60 seconds, it's a game changer over time. It's really fun to watch that. Number 2, after the offering moment, is to communicate with your givers on a regular basis. You're doing that in the offering moment, but we would encourage giving statements at least 4 times a year, including the annual giving statement. And I can hear all of you right now going, I got enough to do, rather than trying to monkey around with some giving statements. Yes, but no. Would you rather have another $100,000 a year in income? It's worth monkeying around that. To communicate with our givers, even through something as simple as a giving statement, is a way to say thank you. It's a way to inform them. It's a way to encourage them. It normalizes generosity. There's a way to do that. It's a little labor intensive, absolutely. But if it's a pastoral connection and you're saying thank you and connecting the dots between your giving and impact through our church, it's a smart thing to do. And we'll show you how to do that and in a way that that makes sense. Number 3 is to automate as much of the giving in your church as possible. Culture is moving in this direction. It already has. I talked to, both my daughters are married and have young kids, and I mess with their friends and them a lot. I go, hey, show me your checkbook. They go, why? We don't even know where it is. We're not even sure we have one. The whole premise of an offering in church service is that somebody shows up with cash or a check. And that's very odd. Some people love to give a check in worship because that's an act of worship and it's very meaningful to them. And that we want to honor that and celebrate that. I talked to a guy a couple of months ago. He said, I write 1 check a month. It's my church. Everything else is electronic, but there's something special about putting that check in the basket. But 70% or more of our culture live in a digital world, whether it be through debit cards or credit cards or any number of payment platforms that are available to that. There are 10 ways to give to a church, only one of which occurs in worship. As we automate the giving and normalize these other giving patterns, it becomes a way to increase the giving frequency and therefore the giving total that comes in for the year. It's a giver preference. Some prefer to give through their bank bill pay. Some that tend to be more sophisticated donors have things called donor advised funds. Some really prefer to give out of their checkbook. Let the giver pick whichever way they want to give. It's our job to give them the opportunity to give in their preferred manner, whether that be through your app or through bank bill pay, text, whatever it is. We'll help you figure out what those best pathways are, and you can figure that out. Number 4 is understanding how to disciple givers. There's a part of church with the financial team, the treasurer, that is a transactional step. You give, we acknowledge that, we steward these finances well, we have oversight. That is very transactional. The heart of givers is much more transformational. How does this matter to me spiritually? How does this grow me? How do I know what God wants me to do financially? How do I know how to give? How do I work through the emotional carnage of where I'm at in my personal life? I'm masking that very nicely week after week, but my private world could be a mess. Here are the 5 stages or 5 emotional levels of giving. This is why you can't just preach on tithing and stewardship and expect people to all make some kind of a unified decision. But here are the 5 levels. This is out of Thrivent, our Lutheran friends out of Minneapolis. First is people that live at a subsistence level. They have more expense than they have income coming in. It is crazy to think that they're going to give consistently if they can't make that month's rent payment, if the car is getting ready to be repossessed, if their kid's gone to college and they have to take out massive student loans where their kid doesn't go to college. It's very hard to navigate through that subsistence level of emotions and help people understand what God wants them to do. Secondly, is struggling. Better than subsistence, struggling is that I got just enough coming in each month to pay the bills, but Lord help me if I got a transmission that goes out or the air conditioner goes out. We see data all the time from secular sources that says 50% of American households can't cover a major car repair. They got to put it on a credit card or borrow money from their family. If those kinds of houses are struggling, that number of houses are struggling, why would we expect them to give? They're not going to do it. They want to maybe, but they can't get through the emotional barrier of money to make that happen. When we look at church giving data, and again, I'd be very happy for myself or one of my colleagues to do an analysis for you. It is almost always the case, whether you're a church of, I've done it for churches of 24,000, I just did it last week for a church of 200. It's almost always the same percentages. Half of the people in your church give nothing or effectively next to nothing. Another 20% gives something like $3,000 annually, and the rest will give somewhere around $4,000 a year and up. It's the 80-20 rule. 20% of the people provide 80% of the numbers. And this is very common, and I dare you to have us check your data to validate that in your church. But subsistence people, struggling people, this is half of our culture. No matter where you are in a part of the country, the data strongly suggests that half of your people are not healthy financially and therefore are highly unlikely to give without pastoral intervention. Subsistence, struggling, stable, this means they have some positive cash flow. They got more coming in, they have some savings. You know what it's like to live when you have savings? Isn't there the different, wow, I can absorb that new air conditioning unit that just blew up. We'll be okay. That's all right. When a capital campaign comes around, I can, because I have some margin and I have some stability in my finances, I'm able to give. If I'm doing a campaign and I'm not addressing subsistence or the struggling levels, you're not going to get much campaign engagement at all. Subsistence, struggling, stable, secure, that means you got way more money than you will ever have need to spend. I'm very secure in that. And then there's the surplus crowd. This is about 4 to 6% of many giving church communities that for whatever reason, God has gifted financially and they have great capacity to give. And this is where the Nazarene schools and seminary and all these places, they found these people. It's very easy to find who these people are, and they will be, and they'll be identified and found on that. Chris, good question there. Is this analysis something that should be approved by the boards before initiating? Sure. We can absolutely give information around that that would give them confidence and safety that this is an okay and appropriate thing to do. And Phil, you can vet all that out and you can give the okay as much as you want. We absolutely want to honor your processes and leadership as we do this. The subsistence, struggling, stable, secure, and surplus, understanding that people are at different stages spiritually and emotionally informs us of how we work with our constituency. I work with a Wesleyan church today. We're doing a capital campaign, several $1 million worth of capital campaign. The vast majority of the funds will come from people that will be talked to and engaged outside of the worship service. They do a great job of reaching people. 30% of their givers are healthy, robust givers. We're going to have a unique conversation with that group and a different conversation with the other 70 that really aren't giving to the church at all. The premise of a capital campaign is giving to this capital campaign is above and beyond your regular tithing or giving, right? If 70% of your congregation is neither tithing or giving at a regular level, they check out when it comes to capital campaign time. You're not talking to me. We know how to navigate that around your capital campaign, but understanding that people live at different emotional, spiritual levels is a key part to discipling givers. Celebrate new givers. This is something that is a lost art. When people give for the first time, it is very appropriate to drop a thank you letter. It's a pastoral connection. And here's why. When somebody gives to your church for the first time, what they're effectively doing is declaring for you that they have a new depth of relationship with the church. They're raising their hand and saying, I'm buying into this outfit. I'm willing to invest my treasure and my heart through this gift. It's a pastoral moment. To not acknowledge that can be a missed moment, which is why out of every 10 first-time gifts that you get, probably 4 at most 5 will give a second gift. We can change that. What if for every 10 gifts, first-time gifts you get this year, that they stick and give a second gift and become regular givers? That's a big game changer when it drops down to the income side of your P&L. Simple note that would say, Dear Brad and Lisa, thank you for being part of First Nazarene. I understand from our treasurer that you gave your very first recorded gift to our church. Although I'm not aware of the amount of the gift, I am highly appreciative of your graciousness. Thank you for being part of the church. I love being your pastor, Pastor Phil. It's labor intensive to write the note, absolutely, but I can tell you it's golden in terms of a pastoral connection. It's transformative. It invites them into a new level of pastoral care and connection with you and the church, and it means that they're far more likely to stick in their giving patterns from there. Therefore, giving, acknowledging first-time givers, even if you don't know the amount, which is absolutely fine, that's a key thing. Lastly, or next to the last thing, know your data. There's three parts about data. Getting it, what does it mean and what do you do about it? Most of the time, you don't even know how to get to the data. It's in there, you get some reports, you might even look at average giving per week per attendee or some other more traditional metrics, but it's not really informative from a stewardship and a discipleship standpoint. Again, we can help you look at your data and understand what that means. You got to get it first, and then what does it mean, and what do you do about it? Lastly, build the narrative. We are people of stories. A lot of giving and stewardship is more caught than taught. Watching, hearing people live out their faith, how they give. It's less about going through the mechanics of tithing or giving, and it's much more about the joy of giving and watching people to do that. Great story. It was a couple that they stood up. It was in a capital campaign of a church, and they said, when we got married, we were both Christ followers, grew up tithing from an early age, and our first decision was we're going to give 10% day one of our marriage. And everybody went, yeah. Pretty standard stuff. We know you. Tell us something we didn't know. Then they said, and every year on our anniversary, we committed to increase 1% more. We wanted to live our lives radically as kingdom people through our marriage. They had been married 30 years. At least they were giving what? 40%, right? Anybody on this webinar want to tell me you're giving 40% of your gross household income? Maybe, could be. Some I've known. I have a couple colleagues that give very generously, over half of their income over time. Just the ones that I know about, because they're caught up with the bug of generosity. Or people who understand that they're suppressing their lifestyle so they can give more. Not so much, Lord, how much do you want me to give, but the reverse of, Lord, how much do you want me to keep? And how much do you want me to give to fund kingdom causes? That's a pretty cool place to be. A lot of that is more caught than taught, modeling people's stories and simply saying, hey, you give, here's the impact of what happened around here. Watched a church a couple months ago, they did a big baptism weekend. It was really a lot of energy and a lot of people. They videoed all the baptisms, and then the next week they showed a video in their worship of every single baptism with a name. The good music behind it. You're watching people's expression as they come up out of the water. But the pastor wisely tied that in and said, you know why we were able to do this? This is our chief mission statement. It's because you guys give. You give, this stuff happens. As our offering moment occurs right now, I want to thank you for making those baptisms happen. The place went nuts. But it was a direct tie-in to you give and stuff happens around here. We don't wait for some kind of committee annual report. We don't wait for some kind of treasurer report or accounting function. We are people of story and people of impact, which is where most of the best fundraising goes. As people tell stories and demonstrate impact, that's where people's hearts tend to go, instead of just, hey, you ought to give to your church and trust us, this is going to be good. All right, wrapping it up, next steps. Feel free to give me a call, Brad at Generis, or email me, brad@generis.com. Either I will answer you or one of my colleagues will, and we'll help you walk through that. Phil, I'll send you slides for this, some notes for this that we can post up at generis.com, GENERIS.com. There is there are a lot of resources there that you can download. Dave, excellent comment here. Congregation of 80 full-time givers. 10% try to give, 10% have little give. Believe it's hard for people to give when they sense God is the ultimate priority. gathered from the treasurer's report, should we be considered the anomaly? I'd like to look at the data and make sure that your treasurer is interpreting that correctly. There are different ways of what's a full-time giver. You might have meant full tithe giver. I would like to know how your treasurer vetted that. But if those are your numbers, yep, you're an anomaly, and you should probably be on the cover of Christianity Today and write a book about how to do that. We'll hire you here, Dave, and come on to Generis, and we'll hire you, and you can help us understand how to do that. All right. I think that we're coming up to the top of the hour. I think that's all the questions on the chat. Phil, anything that you'd like to wrap up with?
No, thank you very much. You're helping us out to understand tithing and how important it is, and how we can help build the kingdom. So sounds great. We really appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone who has joined us and who will join us by video or recording. So blessings to all. Brad, thank you so much. You hit a home run tonight.
A privilege. Thanks again for all that you do.
Yep.
Anyway, we can serve you guys in Gallup.
Brad, this is Art from Buffalo, Kansas. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say thank you. I got a couple of things, like 120 or 125 things I can take back to my church tomorrow. So thank you very much. I learned quite a bit. Thank you, sir, and God bless you.
Sure. Hey, let me know. I'll help you figure out what the top 3 things are to do out of that 120. But again, we will be happy to give ourselves away. No obligation, no charge at all.
I'll shoot you an email. Thank you.
You got it. All right. Good night, all. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everybody. Blessings.